Hello and welcome to EWTN GB. It's my great pleasure to host today Father Dwight Longenecker. I would like to say, welcome to the UK, but it's actually welcome back to the UK.
That's right, thanks.
So it's fantastic to have you here. We want to talk a little bit about Father Dwight's life, how it started in the UK and moved across to the States, and how he started as an Anglican vicar and eventually ended up as a Catholic priest, with a lot of literary interconnections in between, and of course the life story that binds it all together. Father, how did it all start?
Well, first of all, you made it sound like I was brought up in the UK. In fact, I was brought up in Pennsylvania in America,
right. Okay.
But came to the UK to study after college in America.
I see.
So I came here to train as an Anglican vicar at Oxford, and then stayed here for 25 years.
Fantastic. And in that 25 years, a lot happened. So you started as an ordinand, and then took on an island parish.
Yeah, I was trained at Oxford for the Anglican ministry and ordained in the early 80s to be an Anglican priest. As an American young man, I had this crazy vision of being an Anglican country vicar. In America, they tell a young man, you can be anything you want, just aim for it, to my son. And other guys wanted to be the president or a CEO of a big company or a millionaire or a major league ball player. I wanted to be an Anglican country vicar of all things. So the door opened up for me to do that. And I served in a parish in Bexhill-on-Sea in East Sussex.
Lovely.
And then went on to Cambridge, where I was a chaplain for a couple of years, before going to the Isle of Wight, where I finally became a country vicar on the Isle of Wight. The
dream came true.
It did, yes.
And in that parish, you're living the parish little village life. What sort of changed over those years that you thought, maybe I want to move on, or is this it?
Well, in America, I was brought up in a very evangelical Protestant home, and therefore there was a pretty heavy strain of anti-Catholicism.
Right.
But while I was in college, and then I became an Anglican, largely through the attraction of C.S. Lewis and T.S. Eliot and these great Anglican literary figures, and had the idea of coming to England. So when that happened, a friend of mine in America who was Catholic suggested that I visit a Benedictine monastery. So I went to Doway Abbey, the Benedictine monastery in Berkshire. And as I then progressed through the Anglican Church, my understanding of the Church and theology became much more Catholic, so that by the time I was a vicar on the Isle of Wight, I was saying that I was a Catholic, but in the Anglican Church.
And was there any sort of pushback from your parish, or even from the family?
I think my family were confused about why I wanted to go to England and what was this Anglican thing. They were certainly they were open to Anglicanism because it wasn't Catholic. But once I began talking about Catholicism, it became a bit more difficult. But they were open to that, and they said, well, if that's where God is leading you to do, we trust your judgment.
Now, kind of towards the end of, I assume, that time on the island, you must have already been thinking about what would it be like to cross the Tiber.
Yeah, I was spending a lot of time at Cor Abbey, which is the Benedictine monastery on the Isle of Wight. I had good friends there. And as I say, my understanding of the Church and worship and sacraments was becoming much more Catholic. And it was the crisis in the Church of England at the end of the 1980s and early 1990s over the ordination of women to the priesthood, which caused myself and many other Anglican priests to question not just that judgment, but also brought us to face the question of authority in the Church. Which is basically when Christians disagree, good Christian people disagree about major issues, who makes the call? How do you decide? And the Church of England said, well, we put it to the vote in the General Synod. But it seemed to me more and more that the Church of England was exactly what it said it was, the Church of England. And my view was becoming much broader than just England. I'd been on a pilgrimage in 1987 to Jerusalem, hitchhiking from England to Jerusalem and staying in monasteries all along the way.
Wow.
And of course, there wasn't much Anglicanism in France and Italy and Greece.
Of course not, no.
And so as I traveled, though, I became more and more involved in the Catholic Church. So step by step, the Lord was leading me to take that decision. That decision.
And then in the final, what was the final push? Was there a particular event, or did you just say, right, actually, ordination of women.
When the Church of England was debating the ordination of women to the priesthood, the Catholics and the Orthodox said to them, look, don't do this. Okay, this is really going to be a serious obstacle to church unity, a really big obstacle. And the Church of England basically said, so?
We voted.
Yeah. So at that point, I and about 700 or 800 Anglican priests and many, many Anglican lay people basically said, well, this has helped us to decide that we're actually Catholic. We're not Catholics in the Anglican Church. We want to be Catholics in the Catholic Church.
Yeah. So that kind of almost brings in a new period of your life.
Right.
You're no longer a member of the Anglican clergy, but not yet a member of the Catholic clergy.
No, at that time, an awful lot of the Anglican priests were being ordained as Catholic priests, including some of the married men. By this time I had got married and we had 2 kids. And Rome had opened the door for married former Anglicans to be ordained as Catholic priests, but it was still a long process. Every man's application needed to be considered on a case-by-case basis. A file of paperwork, it needed to be compiled and sent to Rome for approval. And then the Pope would sign off on it. It would come back and the bishop had approval to ordain this man as a priest, even though he was married. So that process for me was rather delayed for lots of complicated reasons here in England. So we waited for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Until the door opened to be able to go back to my native US where I was ordained as a Catholic priest.
And that time, those 10 years, actually became a very fruitful time for you.
That's when I began writing. I was working for the St. Barnabas Society, which is a marvelous charity here in the UK, which helps convert clergy, not just convert Anglicans, but converts from Judaism, converts from Buddhism, converts from Methodism, and so forth. So I was working for them part-time and then began my writing. So I began writing some books and producing some articles and doing some other writing.
And were any of those particular books and articles, is there one that stands out to you that kind of go, yeah, that was a real fruit of...
Well, the first one was a book called The Path to Rome, which was a collection of conversion stories of a lot of the British converts who had come in during this same time period. People like former Conservative MP Anne Widdecombe and the former Bishop of London, Graham Leonard, and various others contributed a chapter to the book. So I edited that book. And that was the first one I got started on.
That's fantastic. Now, let's just scroll a little bit forward. You are writing and the opportunity arises now to become, to kind of study and get ready for Catholic ordination. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, that was amazing the way that opened up because things were obviously not happening here. I'd waited for 5 years and the gears of bureaucracy were grinding slowly. Somebody joked and said to me, he said, don't worry, he says, no wonder Rome is called the Eternal City. So we were waiting and waiting. And we were on vacation in Greenville, South Carolina, where my family had settled. And the priest there, I told him my story, and he said, hang on, he said, you're an American citizen. I said, yes. He said, it's possible to have 2 bishops. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you have your bishop in England where things are not happening. He said, but you're also an American citizen and your family's home is South Carolina. So the Bishop of Charleston, South Carolina is also your bishop. And he's coming for dinner tomorrow night. Do you want to meet him? So I met the Bishop of Charleston, who was at that time Bishop Robert Baker.
Right.
And he had had some experiences in South Carolina, which made him wonder about South Carolina Southern Baptists and so forth. And he was a bit frustrated. And when he learned that was my background, he said, so you want to be, he says, you're from that background, but you want to be a Catholic priest? I said, yes. He said, you need to come and be ordained here. He says, you understand these people because I don't.
Yeah, of course.
So the door opened up then for me to go and be chaplain in a Catholic school in Greenville, South Carolina, and to be ordained there.
And throughout this whole time, obviously you're married and your kids are around, and what are they making of this whole process?
Well, when we came into the Catholic Church in 1995, our 2 oldest children were just infants, so they sort of came along with us, and then the 2 boys, the younger boys, were born after we were Catholics.
Okay.
So they grew up with us in the Catholic Church. They never known anything other.
And the kind of the pathway for your wife, was it similar? Was it just kind of...
Well, she's English and she's a nurse and a mother, and I think she would say that it's really it was the pro-life stance of the Catholic Church which really convinced her. Once she was having children and she was a nurse, she was saying, you know, abortion is a crime. How can people do this?
Yeah.
And the Anglicans were soft on that issue. And so she that caught her imagination and convinced her that the Catholic Church was the way to go.
And brought her along.
And
I assume that now she's very much an integral part of your ministry, wherever you, in your parish.
Well, she is and she isn't. She's very supportive, but she has her own business.
Okay.
And she has, because as a married Catholic man, I don't actually take any more from the diocese than the celibate men do.
Right.
And so that's not enough to support a wife and family and to provide for retirement and so forth.
All that kind of stuff.
So her business is helping us with that aspect of things.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Before this interview, we were sort of talking a little bit about the parish that you're in at the moment and kind of, you know, how it really grew around you. Just talk to us a little bit about that. You spoke of a village hall to start with.
After I was a Catholic chaplain in the Catholic high school for 5 years, I wrote to the bishop and said, you know, with the manpower shortage, if you need me in a parish to help in a parish somewhere, I'm also happy to do that. So unbeknownst to me, he'd been talking that very week with the next door parish, which was going through a time of crisis.
Right.
And he said they wanted to, the priest there needed to move on. So the bishop said to me, would I continue being the chaplain at the school, but also be the administrator of this parish? He said, he gave the impression that it was just a small parish where much was happening. Well, when I got there, the first thing they said was, Father, our school is in crisis, you need to save it.
Wow.
And the second conversation was, Father, we need to build a new church and you're the priest to build it. So it soon became obvious that this was not a quiet little parish with not much going on. There was a big job to do.
Big job.
So after a few years, I resigned at the school and went to be full-time in the parish. And since then, it's grown wonderfully. We did build the new church, and we're just about to build the new school. And
in terms of numbers, has the parish grown, or has it just had the same amount of parishioners?
No, it's grown beautifully. We have a wonderful influx of new young families, and church is packed every week.
Yep.
It's traditional worship. It's not traditionalist with the Latin Mass, but it's traditional celebration of the Novus Ordo Mass with reverence and fine music and so forth. Some things which I brought in from the Anglican tradition.
Of course, yeah. It kind of leads me on to the next question that I'd be curious to find out a little bit about. You know, you've ministered in two traditions with fantastic liturgy, with fantastic musical heritage. Where are the sort of similarities? What are the differences? Well,
one of my books is actually called More Christianity.
Okay.
A little pun on C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Okay. And my thesis of the book is that coming from an evangelical Protestant background, I have not forsaken that by becoming an Anglican and then a Catholic. Instead, I've added more to it. So adding more to it in the Anglican tradition meant coming to England, being rooted in history, adding on the wonderful literary and musical tradition of the Anglican tradition, and then becoming Catholic was to bring that as well into my experience of Catholicism. So our parishes, we try to develop a good music program. In our school, we have a fine, good liberal arts program focusing on literature and drama and music, and trying to build up all this aspect within the Catholic Church,
which are really pieces of, you know, the tools that the Catholic Church has always used in its education of the young, you know, building them up, teaching kids to think critically, parishioners to think critically.
Yes, we have to remember that all of the riches in the Anglican tradition and all of the riches in the evangelical Protestant tradition are rooted in the fact that it all comes from Catholicism originally. And so our Catholicism has been impoverished by the loss of these traditions. So I'm trying, if I can, in my own small way, to integrate them back in and
to revitalize
and experience the fullness of the Catholic faith with strong emphasis on, for instance, on the Bible. We have, you know, Bible studies and strong biblical preaching, which is from the evangelical tradition.
Of course.
And then adding in the strong cultural traditions from the Anglican Church.
Yeah. Now, the Catholics and Anglicans live happily side by side here in Walsingham, the Catholic shrine, the Anglican shrine. You've got quite a connection to Walsingham that we were talking about earlier, and, you know, even to the point of, and you've now got an image of Our Lady of Walsingham in your parish.
Yeah, I have Walsingham to thank for my progress to the Catholic Church.
Right.
I can remember as an Anglican curate in Bexhill-on-Sea, I was headed off to Court Abbey on the Isle of Wight for my retreat, and a parishioner came back from Walsingham with a rosary and said, "Father," she said, "you need this."
Wow.
So I'd never prayed the rosary before. So when I went to Core, and my Protestant background was kind of like prayers to Mary, come on. But I went to Core and I picked up a little leaflet, how to pray the rosary, began to pray the rosary. So Walsingham was a key point in that pilgrimage. Around the same time, I made a pilgrimage to Medjugorje and experienced some of the amazing things there. And then came back to Walsingham several times over the years on pilgrimage.
On pilgrimage, yeah.
And so it's been a real connecting point for me.
When you kind of come back to England and see the little village churches and, you know, this, it's very rainy today outside. Do you miss England?
There's certain aspects of England I miss.
Yeah.
I've been looking forward to a decent breakfast.
Of course,
and a decent pint of beer. And I always love seeing the English countryside and getting back into the English countryside. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
An awful lot's changed though, and I'm not sure that it's changed for the better. I sense that in England at the moment, you know, the skyscrapers in London and all the growth in London, I sense that in a way England is more affluent and more wealthy and high-tech than it's ever been before. And yet I sense also a real spiritual vacuum, an emptiness within the culture, in which England has become drawn into this modern world with all of its glitz and all of its glamour, and yet there's a lack of transcendence, a lack of spiritual awareness in a general sense, not just Catholicism or Anglicanism, but empty churches and empty souls and empty hearts.
I was speaking to a friend of mine who is involved in the synodal path. He seemed to indicate that an overwhelming thread throughout the feedback was like, we need a lot more from the pulpit. We need clear guidance, etc. And also kind of a feedback from the clergy saying, you know, we really need ongoing formation. Are those kind of two things that you would agree with, or do you think?
I do up to a point.
Okay.
I think it's easy to blame the clergy for this spiritual vacuum or this spiritual emptiness that I'm talking about. But very often I hear people say, we need better formation, we need better catechesis, we need better teaching. That's all true. But in my experience as a priest, very often we would lay on a Lent course, or lay on a Bible study course, or lay on a small group course or video-based course to try to remedy this. Nobody signs up. So there needs to be an enthusiasm from the audience as well as an enthusiasm from those who wish to provide this training. So we need, and also lay people need to roll up their sleeves and get on and do the job. They're smart, they're educated. In our parish, I'm thrilled that our men's group have a group of guys who are getting together and saying, hey, what do we want to study next? And they find the resources, they find the video sources, they resource the speakers, they line people up, they do video interviews with people, they do the whole thing themselves, and they get on and explore their faith together.
What do you think is feeding this?
Well, where I'm sitting, a lot of my people see a crisis in Western civilization, they see a crisis in the world around them. They read in the paper the terrible epidemic of mass shootings and violence in our society, and a war-based society, and the things terrible, and rise of drug addiction and alcoholism and suicide. And they're saying the answer to this is a spiritual answer, and the priests can't do everything. We can get on and do something about this for our children, for our grandchildren, and for our society in general.
And we as the church are kind of standing right in the middle, in the crossroads of that.
This is the beauty of Vatican II. Vatican II was supposed to say to us, this is the church of the people, so get on and do it. And my experience in the US is that American lay people are actually getting on and doing it. EWTN's a perfect example. Let's start a global television network, and so they get on and they
Alabama,
do it.
Here we go. Yeah. Did you feel that was kind of part of the Anglican heritage here, that people kind of, let's just do something, or?
No.
I
think the fact that the Anglican Church is the established church has ingrained in a lot of the people the attitude of well, the vicar will do this.
Yeah.
And if you go back far enough, the lord of the manor will do this.
Yeah.
The royal family will do this. And nowadays, it's the government will do this.
Yeah.
The state will do this. We'll get a grant to do this. I can remember when I was an Anglican priest, for instance, there was a homeless problem in town. And I suggested that we actually get on and start a soup kitchen or a food pantry or something like that. And one of the priests said, no. He says, you can't do that. He says, that's the government's job.
Oh, wow.
So there's this kind of sense here, which is very historical in England, of because of the political history and because of the class system, you know, the big people on top will do all of this. We don't need to do it. I want to sort of challenge that, really. Well, it's not for me to do that, but I can see that it should be challenged.
Well, maybe this interview might challenge the odd person to take up.
Well, I mean, there are some bright spots here as well. I can remember when I was here, the charismatic movement had an annual conference called Celebrate, where the lay people simply got on and planted and sent out the invitations and did the whole thing.
Fantastic, yeah.
Youth 2000, 20 years ago, was a program which was started by young people for the millennium, and they got on and planned conferences and speaking engagements and so forth, and got on and did it.
With big festivals here in Walsingham.
Yeah, and Walsingham is a case in point.
As a child, I grew up in Germany, and Youth 2000 had crossed over into Germany by then as well.
Right.
So very much a forward-thinking movement.
There are a couple of key points about this that I would stress as well, that these kind of things always begin small. If it's a work of the Spirit and a work of the Lord, it's the parable, the seed being planted. If it begins small and it begins local, it's usually authentic. If it begins with a big gimmick and a big dream and we're going to do this great big thing, it usually flops. So, I mean, Mother Angelica started with, what was it? One camera in one radio station in an abandoned garage in her convent.
Just kind of, I guess, looking back on your life, your ministry as a whole, like, what for you is the central red thread that has just always dragged you through, got you through, helped you through?
Well, I have to go back to my evangelical Protestant roots. And there was, of course, a strain there, which is very important, a real profound personal commitment of conversion and commitment to Christ and His mission, which is individual, which is an individual experience, which I think is vital and crucial for people. I'm not talking necessarily about the evangelical getting saved experience, although that is one expression of what I'm talking about. There are many ways that this happens, but people need to seek this. Our Lord said, search, seek, and you shall find it, ask, and you shall receive. Go out and ask the Lord for that experience, however it comes to you.
Often for Catholics, kind of that personal relationship with Christ, you think, oh, it's a bit abstract, or that's a bit Protestant. In a concrete way, like, how can a Catholic really enter into that?
Right. Well, for Catholics, it happens at confession. Okay, where you go and you meet the forgiveness of our Lord. It should happen in Mass, where they go and make their confession and they receive the Lord at Mass. But I would also say, go on a retreat, go on a pilgrimage, join a Catholic small group, explore your faith, be curious, ask the questions that you have. Don't just go along with the flow.
Where do you see, I guess, the Church going? Which is perhaps a bit of an open question, but where do we go from now? We're trying to rebuild. You've had tremendous success in your own parish. You're aware of the challenges as a church.
What I'm sensing at the moment is that Western society is suffering what I call a crisis of transcendence. Transcendence is a general term for a belief in the supernatural, a belief in the spiritual realm, a belief in the reality of the spiritual realm. And humanity, no matter what culture it is, where it is in history, has always believed in the transcendent. It doesn't matter if they were pagans or Buddhists or Jews or Muslims or whatever. Humanity has always thrived, and it's had a spirit, it's had a heart, it's had a heart of transcendence. In our Western world, our affluence and our technology and our reliance on objective science, and I'm not against science, but I'm against making science a god, has kind of deleted or negated the transcendent. And we're in desperate need for a renewal of transcendence in society. We can find this through the arts, we can find this through especially through religion and spirituality, but in Catholicism it becomes precise and focused. But when we lose transcendence generally, we lose the heart of man. C.S. Lewis called this the abolition of man in his famous book.
Of course.
And that's what we're experiencing right now. And we're in desperate need for renewal of transcendence. And I believe this will come through renewal of religion, but it requires people to search for it. It's not something which just happens automatically.
And do you think that there's a lot of searching for religion? Everybody's, I want to go on a trip to India and find myself there. Or I want to experience this religion, this experience, even down to people experiencing the occult. I guess that's all a searching for.
It is. And people will say things like, oh, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious.
Yeah.
And I like to ask them, well, how do you do that?
Okay.
Okay.
How does that conversation evolve then?
They don't know.
Right.
So I said, what do you do? Do you go and sit on a mountaintop in your underwear or what? I mean, so what do you do to be spiritual? Do you just go and go for a walk with your dog and feel close to God when there's a sunset?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you be spiritual but not religious? Because being religious is the way we are spiritual.
Yeah.
Because religion puts flesh on the bones. It actually gives something concrete. We're here, we paid the money, and we made the effort to come to England on pilgrimage to a specific place, to visit specific places and say specific prayers, because we're religious, not just spiritual.
So actually, really, all of that searching is actually a course for hope, really, where we as Catholics can bolt into it and say, actually,
Right.
You're searching for something. Why don't you come to Mass?
And this is the heart of Christianity. I've just spent 2 months in Jerusalem on sabbatical, where the stones themselves speak of you, of the events of what happened here. You pray at the site where Jesus was crucified, you celebrate Mass where he was resurrected, and you're saying, wow, this really happened and it was right here.
You must be thinking, I can't believe I'm doing it. Yeah. Me, of all people, I'm allowed to...
And so Christianity is the story of the spiritual, the transcendent, become real. And so this is the great riches that we have to offer the world. A way to actually be spiritual, a way to discover the transcendent, is through religion.
And I think there's no better way to wrap up this conversation. Father Dwight, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for the chance and the opportunity.
And it's great to have you here. I'm glad that you can enjoy rainy old England for a few more days. If you have enjoyed this interview, there's plenty more on offer on our website and on our various social channels. It would be fantastic if you not only hit the subscribe button, but also go to our donate page and be very, very generous there. God bless, and see you next time.